I was born in Decatur, Illinois on November 18, 1923. And Decatur is located right in the central part of the state. So I'm really a Midwestern young man. And I had 5 brothers. And my mother and father died when I was quite young. And my father, matter of fact, was only 40, and my mother's was 38. And nothing that was unnatural about it, except they would probably be living today with the resources that we have in medicine, you know. But then my father was died even before penicillin, so with double pneumonia. So my oldest brother was married and had a child, and then I had 3 younger brothers myself, and I was 16, and I decided that I'd better move out and have one less mouth to feed. And so I joined the Army at 16. That was before the war, and was immediately sent to Fort McClellan, Alabama, near Anderson, Alabama. And at that time, the divisions did their own training. And later during the war, of course, they changed and had posts designed to fill the replacements and so forth. So I went immediately to H Company, the 22nd Infantry Regiment, which is the heavy weapons company, and was assigned to the mortar, 81 millimeter mortar department. And so that's where I spent my early training. Had a West Point graduate as a company commander, and so I had a good one. He was really tough, but fair, you know. And so that was all the pre-war kinds of things was maneuvers in Louisiana and in Carolinas, and at that time the 4th Division was called a motorized infantry division, and they were designed to try to discover what kind of formation and organization that we should have that would compare with Hitler's mechanized outfit that was running across Europe at the time, you know. And but eventually they changed us back to a regular infantry division before we went overseas in 1944. The training was a lot of calisthenics, a lot of running, a lot of hiking, with as much as 80 pounds on your back, and to us a 20-mile hike with all the equipment on was a normal kind of thing. Matter of fact, it was real challenging because we wanted to determine who it was that could make it and who couldn't, you know. So that was a big physical part of it. Matter of fact, I led the company with another sergeant every morning before breakfast on a 1-mile run. That was an usual kind of thing to do. Other than that, we had rifle training, heavy weapons training. We had motorized training. Otherwise, we would get in our half tracks and that sort of thing and take a motorized tour and get off and theoretically someplace and attack the enemy and that sort of thing. So it was rather thorough training. It kind of moved from the motorized, though, when we went from Camp Gordon, Georgia, near Augusta, and moved us up to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And there we went through street fighting and Thompson submachine guns a lot with our street fighting, and flamethrowers, and those kinds of things, which eventually became quite useful to us. Finally, we went down to Fort Camp Carabel, Florida, right on the panhandle of Florida between Tallahassee and Panama City. Very remote area. Matter of fact, I found out later that Walter Winchell, which was a famous reporter in those days, called it the Alcatraz of the Army because it's so primitive and so difficult. But when we drove into there, why we saw a lot of wild pigs running around, and wondered what was going to happen. But we went into the barracks. The barracks were all wooden, of course, single story. There were no flooring in the floor except a planks that were running through it. Hanging from the ceiling was a wire with a light bulb, 60-watt light bulb hanging down. It was very, very primitive. The wooden double-deck bunks had chicken wire with an old mattress on up on top. No water inside, no latrines. Those were outside, and even eating was that way. You stood up outside eating, and the actual training that began was getting up early in the morning, going down to the docks, getting into small boats, the LCVPs, the Higgins boats, go out into the Gulf of Mexico, run around there for a while, and then hit Dog Beach at Camp Carabel. An interesting event was that you had to know how to swim at least 25 yards with your clothes on. And if you didn't, then we sent our guys down to a training area where they would be trained to swim the 25 yards. But we had to have a large guardhouse put up, a guy with a sharpshooter up there with a rifle to shoot the alligators, to keep them out of the way and away from the guys that were actually being trained. That was kind of interesting. But that's where we had our training for D-Day there, because we went directly from there then to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where we packed all of our gear and everything. We're only there a couple of weeks, and then up to Kilmer, and then on January, late January of 1944, we boarded a ship and sailed to England. And we were only in England 5 months before the invasion. And the training over there is pretty much the kind of training we did in the States. A lot of hiking up in the moors, and in between time, of course, you learned throw your hand grenades and look for what do we call them? Not the mines, but the booby traps. Look for the booby traps and that kind of thing. Also in our training earlier, we had flyovers by friendly airplane. First you saw the pictures and everything, so you could identify friendly fire, and then you'd have them fly over, and then you'd have to identify what they were, like P-47s or B-26s and B-24s, that sort of thing. Yeah. So that pretty much was our training. We went to Fort Kilmer, New Jersey. We were there 10 days. And while we were there, they went over pretty much your history again, and you checked you for the health and so forth, had all your teeth checked and that kind of thing, because they didn't want to spend the money sending a guy overseas and then lose him because he had a toothache. But so we went through those kinds of things. We packed everything, and we had attorneys talk to us about wills, and and made final arrangements about what to do with our monthly income, with payday, because you didn't have paydays once you got in the war. So all those kinds of things. And then one morning early, they called us out, put us in line, marched us down to the train station, and we rode on trains over to Jersey City, New Jersey, and then we got on little ferries, and went across to the dock where the boat was, where the ship was, and we had to carry not only our rifle and other weapons, but we had a big duffel bag of all of everything that we owned in that duffel bag. But nevertheless, as you got there and started up the gangplank, why then the fellow would call out your last name, and then you would pronounce your first name and your serial number. You want to make sure the right guy got on ship, and then up in the ship you went. And it was an English ship, and it was called Cape Town Castle. Matter of fact, it used to be one of their ships that they used to to go from England down into South Africa. But of course, it had been all changed for troop carrier, but nevertheless was English, and so we had bunks that were hammocks actually, and really crowded, and we got tea a couple of times a day with crumplets or whatever they call it. It was terrible, and the food was really bad too. It's English. I don't even remember what I had at the time, but you only got fed twice a day. And I was a staff sergeant, non-commissioned officer at the time, section leader with the mortars, and so I discovered that the non-commissioned officers in England are kept separate from the enlisted men, very much like our officers from enlisted men. So I found that they had a special room on board ship, and I could go up there and I could get cookies and coffee or good tea and so forth. So that worked out really well. But the only thing that you could do on ship as far as exercise is concerned was have a little calisthenics, and that was about it. And so I don't know how long we were on ship, but good part of a month, I suppose. And then we pulled into Liverpool, England, and then eventually we were dispersed by trains to various different places throughout that English area. The 2nd Battalion, which is my battalion, and regimental headquarters of the 22nd Infantry were at Denbury Camp. And then another battalion was someplace else, another battalion was someplace else. So until they had to bring them all together, eventually to put them on the ships for the attack on the continent. We could go down. This Camp Barry was only about 4 miles from Newton Abbot, which was a town of about 20,000. So on the weekends we could go down there, go to the pub, and catch something good to eat, and that sort of thing. But there was trouble between the black soldiers and the white soldiers, because the army was pretty well segregated in those days, and the black guys were dating the girls, and the white guys were jealous about it, and so first thing you know, we got in fights. And so I decided at that time that I'd be better off just staying at home in the barracks. And they solved the problem by making it every other weekend. One weekend for the black soldiers and the next weekend for the white soldiers. So that was a peculiar experience that I had. Camp Denbury was built actually to become a hospital for the invasion. Of course, we didn't know at this time, and I didn't know a lot of this stuff either until I researched it later. But it did become a hospital right after we left, within 24 hours, matter of fact. And they moved all the people out of the area so that we could use live fire in our attack. And we went through that exercise. Interesting enough, the Germans heard the commotions that were going on and got their U-boats up and attacked the end of the column and destroyed 3 or 4 of the ships, and around 800 men were killed, sailors and soldiers, right before. I can't remember now. I know it by heart when I slapped in sands, right? Yeah, right. And you know the story probably of the fellow that was kept quiet for a long time, and then the fellow after the war lived there for a while and kept wondering what some of the artifacts were that he was finding, and finally he found a tank out in the bay and discovered that what had happened there, and made a good story out of it. Yeah. I really don't think I did. We didn't know we were going to England, of course, until we got on an English ship. Once we got on an English ship, we were pretty sure we were going to England. But once we got there, we never really thought about it much. And we even had General Eisenhower come down and review us one time. General Montgomery came down. General Bradley came down one time and reviewed us, and that sort of thing. Of course, we knew we were going to see action, but it never really thought about it in terms of the overwhelming kind of experience it was going to become in terms of the number of ships, number of men, and that sort of thing. You just went about your daily business of doing what you needed to do, and write your letters home. And of course, they began to read those letters, and so we just didn't think about it much. At least I didn't. And one day we just got the orders to load up, and they loaded us up and took us down to right on the coast, around Plymouth and Weymouth and that area, and put us in what they called marshalling yards. And the marshalling yards were wired. You're wired in. The MPs would not let you out and wouldn't let anybody in. They were trying to keep it very secretive as far as the invasion was concerned. There was an armored division there that served as cooks for us and that sort of thing. And we were fed wonderfully well. We felt like Thanksgiving turkeys. But that was great. We continued some training that we had. I had gone to Ranger School before in the States, and one of the things that I had learned was how to use toggle ropes. It goes around your waist, and they can be tied together so that if you need to climb a cliff or something. And so I had some time spent training and teaching some of the people that about the toggle ropes and climbing. Eventually there was a tent with a sand table in it, and with gives us a whole picture of where we're going to land, and so we reviewed that considerably. And then again, one day, next day, load up, and they marched us down to the docks and placed us on different ships. And I still remember the LCI that I got on, number was 229. And I found after the war a picture of that on the internet. So we stayed on the an LCI will hold about 135 GIs and about 10 sailors, and but you go down into the hold of that, and there's just wire bunks that come out of the wall. Very crowded, so we spent most of our time on deck. And we had 10 and 1 rations instead of the 1 box each. We had 10 and 1, so 10 guys would fix dinner for each other. So we spent 24 hours on that, and of course the 5th of June was supposed to have been D-Day, and because of the bad weather, it was postponed to the 6th. But eventually we started across the channel in a convoy of LCIs, and then in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea out there, they had a place that they called Piccadilly Circus, and where they had all of these convoys that were going up and down the coast, picking up people and coming from as far as Scotland, coming around southern England, and then they channeled all those ships into that Piccadilly Circus area, and then they cut them off, going to the various beaches, Omaha and Utah Beach for us, and so they did that, and when we got about 11,000 yards from shore, I transferred from an LCI to an LCVP. And I don't know why we did that, other than maybe the sea was pretty rough or whatever, because an LCI has the capability of going clear into the shore as well. But they transferred us to LCVP. And then we took off from there. And so while we were going to shore, they had four the Navy had, or Coast Guard, had 4 boats that they used to guide us in. And we lost 3 of those on the way in, so we were struggling out there with just one guide boat on it, and which was difficult enough for them. But by the time we got near the shore, the tide was so strong that it pushed us south, and we ended up about 2,000 yards below the place that we'd actually landed, was supposed to land. And that turned out to be a real good thing for us, because we were actually scheduled to land at right in front of a fortification. And when that pushed us south, why, it pushed us out of sight of them. And then several miles inland, they had big fortifications called Aysville and Crisbeck. And they would really have been destructive for us. And they couldn't hit us either. And the one big fortification was WWII, it was called. Fortunately, most of it was taken out by the B-26s when they came in for the final landing. Now the picture was that at about 5:30 in the morning, we had a big battleship with us, and it began firing their big 14-inch guns. And then once they were finished, by then we had the cruisers and the destroyers in close for protection. The Air Force came in, especially the B-26s, did a really great job for us. And so we had good firepower, including rockets. And we had a flare gun to shoot just before we landed, so that they would know that we're landing, that the fire should be lifted. And so we had good protection, and the Navy did a great job at Utah Beach, really a great job. Unfortunately, they didn't do it as well at Omaha. Sometimes my wife says that it take a stick of dynamite to blow me up to get me to move, to get me excited. But I never really felt the tension of it, and I don't remember the guys doing it. If you've been together as long as we had, that you knew each other really well, and you knew you could depend upon them. And so your idea was that, well, here we go, and we've got a job to do, and whatever happens happens, and we'll worry about that when it happens. So we didn't feel uptight about it or worried. All I remember is when I transferred from the LCI into the LCBP, down a little rope ladder, I cracked my knee and hurt that. But and it was cold and damp, and so got in there and got in our circles, and then pushed off for and when they pushed off there, I'm sure the thought came, well, here we go, here we go. But we really had no understanding of what the force was that you were going to meet in conditions until you actually got into it. I knew that it was a big beach because I'd seen that in the tent. There's about 200 yards of beach to go to, and I knew what the fortifications were like, and I knew that they had different obstacles on the beach, and they were exposed because the tide was out. Matter of fact, that was another good thing, because the Germans didn't really think that we would land during bad weather and then with the tide out, but we did. So those were exposed, which made it easier for the engineers to get in there and blow those things out too. And of course they had the projections up with the mines on top and the wire and so forth. And I could see that. And also there was about 4 to 8 foot concrete seawall on Utah Beach. I could see the seawall and then the sand behind it and that sort of thing. And with only 4 causeways then, we called it 1, 2, and 3, and 4 causeways. Or exits, and that was the reason, matter of fact, that the airborne was dropped inland, because Eisenhower knew that if we got caught out on those causeways, we'd be annihilated. So they dropped the paratroops in there to do that, and so that's what I saw, and it was a gray day, and a little chilly. And of course, by the time that we got close enough when there's a lot of noise because of the firing that was going on by battleships and so forth. And but you just kept your head down, and out of the spray of the water that was coming in, it would get you wet as you were going in. So you weren't thinking too much about what it was that I needed to do when I got there. Yeah. There was shelling and snipers, particularly when I arrived. I arrived in the third wave, so D-Day was at 6:30. I got in about 8 o'clock, and by that time the fighting in the fortifications had already been taken place. So the only thing I had to worry about was artillery and snipers. Matter of fact, I only lost one man on the beach, and he was shot right between the eyes by a sniper. Now the next day I lost 8, which is half my men in Aysville and Crisbeck. And that's one of the things that concerns me about the media and so forth. When they show D-Day, usually they talk about Omaha and the carnage that was there, which certainly was. But they make it look like we didn't have any difficulty, really. And we didn't. We lost, the 4th Division lost 197 men there, right on the beach on D-Day. But the next day, when we attacked Crisbeck and Aysville, we lost 50% of our men within 3 or 4 days. And like I said, the second day I lost 8, so out of 16 guys. So it was our D-Day. That's what I always say. Our D-Day was really the second day, yeah, because we had to wade through all of that water. The exits weren't all open, and due to the fact that we all landed in a different place than what we were supposed to, why the one exit, which was exit 3, was really crowded, and so the 22nd Infantry and the 12th, which came in behind us, walked through that, and it took them about 7 hours for us to walk through all that water. Then we hit a road, and then we went up the road to a place called Veraville, and then we spread out and made our skirmish line and waited until morning, because I was surprised to find that it doesn't get dark over there until about 11 o'clock at night. So about 11 o'clock, we began to put out our scouts and dig our holes and that sort of thing, and wait till the next day. And the next day, at 6:30, we jumped off to attack Aysville and Crisbeck. Now our 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, had more difficulty than the first two, because they were actually part of the first wave, and their job was, with the 8th Infantry was to go. 8th Infantry was to go inland, but our third Battalion was to hit and then go up the beach and take out the fortifications there. And so they were down on the beach for a week or maybe 2, because there was a whole extension of that fortification line that run from Utah Beach clear up to what they call the Quinville Ridge. And it took us about 3 weeks to get through that Quinville Ridge, one fortification after another. And matter of fact, that is also where the several Navy ships that were sunk had difficulty. There was only about 2 of them that were actually sunk by German fire, but the mines were terrible. They dropped mines in there, and there was a good dozen Navy ships that were destroyed in Utah Beach, and you never hear about that. I put that in my new book, matter of fact, and make sure that they got credit for what they had done. To get to capture Veraville, which we didn't have to do because the Air Force, the paratroopers, had done that, took that, so we bypassed it then. So that was our first task, and then the second task actually was to attack Crisbeck and Aysville on D-Day, but there's no way that we could have been able to have done that. But so we didn't quite reach our objective the first day. We achieved our position, but not our objective. Now we're already in the hedgerows, as you're aware of, the Hedgerows were really difficult fighting. And again, the Germans would sit back there, and they had all of the avenues of approach to those fortifications zeroed in already. They were mapped. They were fire arrangements had already been made. And so they just sat there and waiting for you to come. And you had to go over the hedgerow and cling to the sides of them. And now our standard way of fighting was that we would have our artillery fire for 15 minutes to an hour on positions over there. But the Germans, again, were dug into the hedgerows, and so it was hard to get to them. And then hopefully we'd get the P-47s, which we called our Infantry Air Force, to come in and dive bomb with their 500-pound bombs and strafe with their 50 caliber machine guns. And as soon as that lifted, why, we would push off. And but then as soon as that lifted, the Germans would come out of their holes too, waiting for you. And then when you actually got to the fortifications, then they also had a back door where they could swing out their troops and come around to your side and hit you from the side without your knowing it. And so that was really tough. Matter of fact, the very first day we got on top of Aysville, and the fellow, the commander of the Aysville German command there, he knew what was going to happen. So he radioed down to Krisbeck to actually fire their artillery on us while we were on top of it. We thought it was friendly fire hitting us, and we had to retreat. And so the next day, then we had to do the job all over again. And this time, they did get troops out the doors in the back and came around and hit us on the side, and we had to withdraw that day. And so for 2 days there, we lost a lot of men, but we didn't take it. But the third day, we finally got in there, and what we did was we brought the 3rd Battalion off the beach, in behind them. And once you get behind these fortifications, then you can do your thing, And we discovered that worked really well when we got to the Siegfried Line then in Germany, because we would pin them down, bring a tank destroyer in behind them, stick their big 98mm gun in through the aperture and shoot about 5 or 6 rounds, and what was left, they'd come out, So, but we began to we used flamethrowers, of course, too, here against Aysville, Krisbeck. We had one Sergeant Riley, matter of fact, who eventually ran him 75 yards, got behind Aysville, and gave it some squirts, and nothing happened. Gave it another couple more squirts, and nothing happened, And he was about to give up, and all of a sudden he heard a bang and a flash. And what had happened, the gas had gotten inside in their ammunition, and it blew it up. And they came out pretty fast after that, in that one. So we can use that kind of a practice then all through the Quinville Ridge, the rest of the way. The idea, of course, our real goal of our troops on Utah Beach was eventually to capture Cherbourg, the harbor there at the end of the peninsula. And that took us until June 25th before we got there. And that was all hedgerow fighting, too, after that, too. The Aysville and Krisbeck, there were actually a complex of fortifications. There were about 4 big fortifications, and they were connected underground, okay? And then they had smaller ones out front or to the side where they would put machine gunners in, so they had their protection and fire. And then, of course, they had communication back to artillery, and they had mortar people, and the German Screaming Mimi, which is a rocket there. So they had all these kinds of things. As I said before, they were all prearranged as far as firing range was concerned and location, So all I had to do was wait for you to get there and then open up. That's the way I lost 8 men the second day. Matter of fact, they got screaming mimes on us. And that's what we call them, screaming mimes, because they sounded screeching noise from the rockets. Those fortifications are still there. I was back with the 60th anniversary, and I went through them again. But they were anywhere from 3 to 10 feet wide. They were thick, reinforced concrete, and it was really, really tough to knock those babies out of there. From Cherbourg, then we came back into the area more closely to the beach, and we got 3 days of our first rest and our first hot meal, first bath, that sort of thing. And then they put us in the line in the Normandy hedgerows, and we fought in there for from about the 28th of June until the 25th of July, and that was hedgerow to hedgerow to hedgerow. And then they wisely decided that, hey, we couldn't just do this over and over again and have this many people, lose this many people. We got to get out of here. So they planned a breakthrough, and they call it the breakthrough at St. Lo. What happened was that they, for the first time in history, used B-17s to bomb the front lines. And so the 4th Division was in line, along with the 30th Division, and waiting for that to happen and then break through it, and break out of hedgerows otherwise. And my regiment, the 22nd Infantry Regiment, was in the back with the 2nd Armored Division, waiting. We would be on tanks to act as infantry with the tanks, and we even had a few days of training with them in the back there a little bit. And so the idea was, as soon as the bombs were dropped, then the frontline fellows would push through, open up a gap for us, and we would shoot through. And that's actually what happened. The only problem was that the dust from the bombing flowed back, and some of the B-17s lost track of their target areas and bombed some of our own front lines, including some of our own people. And General McNary, who was the general of the Air Force, was killed. Ernie Pyle almost got it, matter of fact, that same time too. He described that in his book that he wrote. He thought he was going to get it. He said he could just see the bombs coming toward him, as they were landing. But they fell short of him, so he was okay. But anyway, as soon as that happened, we jumped in and on the tanks, and away we went, and all hell broke loose. There were little groups of Germans still around, and some of them were dazed, and still ready to fight. But we fought all night that night, and we'd stop just long enough to knock out a group of them, and then we get back on the tanks and we won again. And that was kind of hairy at that night. I remember we stopped at one place, and whenever we stopped, we would take positions left and right of the tank that we were with. So there's a little road that we went down, and so we were waiting there temporarily, and all of a sudden there was a German walked out on the road. Kamerad, he said, I give up. And so I took one of my squad leaders, went over to him and got to talking to him. He could talk a little English, and by motions and what he said, pointing over here, we knew there was some other people were over there behind the hedgerows. And we asked him how many, and he said 20. So we said, what the heck? This is one, that's 20. I just said, let's just send him back over there by himself. Why should we take the chance? And by himself and bring him out. If they don't bring him out, then we'll get him. But anyway, so we made that known to him. We took his rifle. He had a pistol. Took his pistol away from him, and he went over there and brought out 22 people on the road. And so we lined them up and disarmed them and sent them back to the rear after that. That was a hairy situation, though. But that was one experience that I had with that breakout. They didn't in the beginning. They had a terrible time. Matter of fact, getting tanks down in those hedgerows. Matter of fact, just to show you how difficult it was, we had one man. You could hear the German tanks backing up and turning around or whatever they were doing. You could hear them clearly, and of course they always had infantry with them. And we had one man with a bazooka that would go out hunting for tanks, and he got 5 of them. But on the 5th one, they got him, and he got the Distinguished Service Cross for that. His name was Hicks, H-I-X. He was really a brave guy, but he got 5 of them. But our tanks couldn't maneuver any better than what they were doing. Interesting enough, as I hear the story, there was a sergeant in some tank company that welded together steel that could weld on the front of the tank, so they could get back and just run right in there and knock that wall out of the way. Otherwise they'd have to climb over, and of course they were subject to being hit under an underbelly. But that helped finally, and then to get the tanks going. But they were affordable. But our tank wasn't as good as the German tanks. Matter of fact, the Germans, as far as I'm concerned, had the best artillery. 88 millimeter was a wonderful gun. It was an anti-aircraft gun, it was an anti-personnel gun, and it was an anti-tank gun. And it was shot like a rifle. You couldn't hear it coming. You learned, as a matter of fact, the first day that I was on the beach, I learned that you could tell the difference between what we called incoming mail and outgoing mail. Incoming being, of course, their artillery, and outgoing would be ours. And so you could walk around and not worry about something unless you could tell it's coming pretty close to you. But with 88s, it was just like a rifle, it can get you. So they had a good gun. Their machine gun was better than ours. And I don't know whether the rifle was better than ours or not, really, but it didn't make much difference. And they were good soldiers. They were good soldiers. On the breakout, then that opened the area for Patton and the Third Army, who was waiting behind us, and our job then was to keep the lane open for them. And so they did shot through there. And there was an attempt by Hitler to have a counterattack that would go clear to the beach, and we were part of that, and we stopped that, and then eventually Patton and the English from the north pinched together and surrounded what became known as the Falaise Gap. And that was an area where the gap didn't quite they didn't quite get them surrounded and left the gap, and we blame the English for that. But the Polish came to the rescue up there and stopped, pretty much almost closed the gap. But there was a lot of them got out. But as they were getting out, the Air Force had a field day on that. That was the end of Normandy. Once that happened, that was the end of Normandy. So we got on trucks. We went to the Seine River, and we were assigned with the 2nd French Armored Division, who was given the pleasure of liberating Paris. And we got to the Seine, and we had engineers brought in some little rubber boats, and we got some people across the Seine River on the south of Paris. In the meantime, the 2nd Armored French were having difficulty, got stopped, and weren't making any headway. So Bradley finally just said, he called General Bradley up and said, "The heck with it, forget the French, go in and liberate Paris." And so we went in the southern area, but the 2nd French did go in the northern area then. So we went right into Paris. And that was an experience, because we got in our trucks then, and drove through the streets, and the people were handing up wine and their babies and whatever. And we thought, boy, this is going to be great for a while in Paris. But we bivouacked in the Paris dump. And my section lieutenant came to me. He said, Roderick, he said, get the guys together. He said, we've got to go to a forward scouting party, make contact with the Germans. So we got in some jeeps and trucks, and away we went, you know. So that was my experience with Paris. 4th Infantry Division didn't have any giving in credit by the French for liberation until just the last several years. Now they finally recognize it. But everything was de Gaulle at the time, and Leclerc, their names. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, it was wonderful to go with Scott. He's an associate pastor of a big Christian church down in Huntington Beach, and so we went together. And we first went to we went backwards instead of going. We went for the 60th anniversary, but we started in Herkin Forest first, or actually we went into the Bastogne area at Houffalize, and where we actually rebuilt a bridge there, and there's a plaque on the bridge by the 22nd Infantry Regiment. And then we went into Hemmerese, where Hemingway was, you know, found that little town, and we went to Blyhoff, and then into the Siegfried, and then up to Herkin. And incidentally, at Herkin, I had made contact before I left with a German historian, and he does some guiding, but he lives there. And so when I got there, and I have a bad hip, so I can't walk a lot. And so he took me around the Herkin part that he could, you know, free. He didn't charge anything, and I'm still in contact with him. And as a matter of fact, the other day I told him I may come over for the 65th, and he said, "Well, this time you let me know ahead of time." He says, "I'm going to arrange transportation, so that you won't be walking for you." Yeah, so that's pretty good. So then from Herkin we went then to the beach, and I had a former Belgium officer that has resigned from the military, retired, and has taken up the 4th Division as his hobby, you know. And he had arranged a series of tours to a group of about 8 of us. So we revisited, of course, all those areas, Crisbeck and around the beach area. And then we went through every little town, about 5 or 6 of them that we had liberated. And they met us, and they had a little ceremony, and they all have a memorial out in front of saying who liberated them and so forth. And I went back to Saintny, that little building next to where I went to see how my buddy was from the machine gun. Just wonderful people. Norman just loves Americans. Rest of the country, you know, but Normandy, you know, they suffered the most. But that was really, really great. And we were there altogether about 10 days. Yeah, when we went back on the beach finally, I tell you the truth, I broke down. And, you know, that was the only time. I didn't up in Herkin or any place, you know, but I got back to the beach, and I guess finally probably everything came together, and I just broke down. Yeah. And he took care of me.